The wind was a solid thing. It did not blow. It pressed. It was a physical wall of moving ice and air that shoved Ilara sideways with every step. Snow, driven horizontally, was not falling, but firing, each flake a tiny needle against the exposed skin of her face. She kept one hand on Copper's flank, her knuckles buried in his thick winter coat. The horse was her anchor in the white chaos, his big body a shield against the worst of the gale. He lowered his head, trusting her lead, his breath pluming in ragged, steaming bursts. They were almost there. They had to be. Ahead, a faint, darker shape resolved itself out of the blinding white. It was not a building, not a tree, but a subtle dip in the landscape, a shadow where a shadow should not be. It was the entrance, a low, arched opening dug into the lee side of the hill. She stumbled, catching herself on the rough-hewn timber that framed the doorway. Copper nudged her forward, his own powerful body trembling not from cold, but from the strain of fighting the storm. She fumbled with the heavy hide-and-plank door, her fingers numb and clumsy. The wind caught it, trying to tear it from her grip, but the leather hinges held. She threw her shoulder against the wood, forcing it inward against the immense pressure. A wave of calm, still air washed over her, smelling of earth, wood smoke, and dry hay. It was a pocket of absolute peace in a world gone mad. She tugged on Copper's reins, and the horse, without hesitation, stepped down the short earthen ramp and into the subterranean darkness. With a final, desperate heave, Ilara pulled the door shut. The roar of the blizzard was instantly severed, replaced by a profound, muffled silence. The only sounds were her own ragged breathing and the soft stomp of Copper's hooves on the packed earth floor. The earth held. The fortress held. 8 years earlier, the wind had been just as cruel. A 12-year-old Ilara dragged a bundle of fallen branches through snow that came up to her knees. They were dry, deadfall from the old oaks on Mayor Hemlock's land, wood no one would ever use. But her mother was sick, and the fire was dying. The cold in their small cabin was a predator, creeping into the corners, stealing the warmth from their bones. She heard the crunch of boots behind her and turned to see Sheriff Thorne, his face a mask of grim duty. "That's Hemlock's property, girl," he had said, his voice flat, stripped of warmth by the cold. "You know the law. No foraging on private land." "It's just deadfall," she had pleaded, her voice small. "The fire is almost out." "The law is the law," Thorne had repeated, unmoved. He took the bundle of sticks from her. He said the town council had decided. Her family was a burden. Her father was gone, her mother was too weak to work. And now she was a thief. They were to be exiled, cast out from Silver Creek, left to fend for themselves in the wilderness beyond the valley. They had lasted 1 winter. Her mother did not see the spring. Ilara did. She learned. She survived. 6 months ago, she had returned, not to the town, but to the unclaimed hills that overlooked it. She was 20 now, her face weathered, her hands calloused, her eyes holding the quiet, steady gaze of someone who had long since stopped asking for permission. Sheriff Thorne had ridden out to find her. He found her not begging, but digging. She was carving a massive hole into the side of a south-facing hill, a trench deep enough to swallow a wagon. "What in blazes is this?" Thorne had asked, looking down from his horse. "You planning on burying a giant?" Ilara paused, leaning on her shovel. "I'm building a home." He had laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "A home? You're digging a mole hole, girl. The first big rain will wash you out. The first freeze will collapse it on your head. This is folly." "The earth knows how to hold itself," she had said, her voice even. "You just have to know how to ask it." He shook his head, a look of pity and condescension on his face. "You're as mad as they say. Suit yourself. Just stay off town land." He had turned his horse and ridden away, leaving her alone with her shovel, her horse Copper, and the vast, silent patience of the mountain. The work began with the earth itself. She chose the location with a precision born of years spent reading the land. It was a southern slope, meaning it would receive the most direct sunlight in the winter, melting snow faster and warming the ground. The hill was composed of dense, stable clay soil mixed with stone, not loose sand that would crumble. A small, year-round spring trickled from the rocks 100 yards away, a source of clean water. Most importantly, the crest of the hill above would act as a natural windbreak, diverting the worst of the northern gales that scoured the valley each winter. The excavation was brutal, relentless labor. She broke the earth with a pickaxe, its rhythmic thud the only sound for weeks. She shoveled the loosened dirt and rock into a large hide sling, which Copper, fitted with a simple harness, would drag away from the site. Day after day, the pile of excavated earth grew into a small mountain of its own. She did not dig a simple cave. She dug a wide, deep trench, 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, sinking it 12 feet into the hillside. She was not just going into the earth. She was going below the frost line, the depth to which the winter cold could penetrate. Below that line, the earth maintained a constant, stable temperature, a deep, primal warmth that no blizzard could touch. Once the great trench was dug, the true engineering began. She needed a roof that could support the tons of earth that would eventually cover it. A flat roof would collapse. She knew she needed an arch. From the thick stand of lodgepole pine on the far side of the hill, she selected her timbers. She felled the trees herself, the sharp crack of her axe echoing in the crisp autumn air. Using Copper, she dragged the massive logs to her building site. She needed a way to bend them. For this, she used the spring. She dug a long, shallow pit, lined it with clay to hold water, and diverted the spring to fill it. Into this pool, she submerged the green logs, weighing them down with rocks. For weeks, they soaked, the water softening their woody fibers. While the timbers soaked, she built the foundation and walls. She hauled hundreds of flat, heavy stones from the creek bed in the valley below. Each stone was a journey, a test of strength and endurance. She laid them meticulously, fitting them together without mortar, creating a dry stacked wall that lined the entire interior of the earthen pit. These stones were not just for support, they were a critical part of her thermal design. They were the battery. During the day, or when the fire was lit, the stones would absorb and store heat. At night, or when the fire was banked low, they would radiate that heat back into the living space, keeping the temperature remarkably even. When the logs were pliable enough, she began the most difficult task. With a complex system of levers and a block and tackle rigged to a sturdy oak, she and Copper hoisted each massive timber into place. She bent them into great sweeping arches, forming the primary ribs of her roof. The base of each arch was anchored deep into the stone foundation. She connected them at the apex with a heavy ridgepole. The final structure was a skeleton of immense strength, a wooden vault designed to distribute the immense weight of the earth that would soon cover it. The arch held. Between the arched ribs, she laid smaller timbers, creating a solid wooden ceiling. Now came the layers, the secret to the fortress's resilience. The first layer, directly on the wood, was birch bark. She had spent weeks peeling it from trees in thick, wide sheets. Laid like shingles, overlapping and sealed with pine pitch, the bark created a waterproof membrane, Nothing was more dangerous in an earth shelter than moisture. A leak would mean rot, mold, and eventual collapse. Over the birch bark went a thick layer of dense, sticky clay from the riverbank. She mixed it with grass to give it tensile strength, pounding it into a solid, impermeable shell 6 inches thick. This layer would stop any water that might somehow get past the bark.
It also served as a barrier against burrowing animals and insects.
Finally, she began to return the earth she had excavated. Carefully, she and Copper moved the dirt back, covering the entire structure until it was buried under 4 feet of soil. The final layer was the original sod she had so carefully cut and set aside at the very beginning. She laid it over the mound like a blanket. Within a month, the grass had taken root again. Her home had vanished, sinking back into the hill from which it was born. From a distance, it was just another gentle swell in the landscape, invisible to any who did not know exactly where to look. The last and most crucial piece of the design was the chimney and its ventilation system. A fire in an enclosed space consumed oxygen and produced deadly smoke. A simple hole in the roof would create a terrible draft and let in snow and rain. Ilara's solution was ingenious. She built her hearth and chimney from stone in the center of the dwelling. The chimney rose straight up, but it was a pipe within a pipe. The inner flue carried the smoke out, while the outer stone jacket heated the air around it. This heated air rose, creating a powerful, consistent draw that pulled smoke from the hearth with incredible efficiency. For fresh air, she ran a long 6-inch pipe made of hollowed-out logs from the base of the hearth, under the floor, and out to the surface of the hill, 50 feet away. The opening on the surface was small, covered with a fine mesh of woven willow to keep out mice and debris, and protected by a small, hooded stone structure to keep out snow. Because the air inside the shelter was warm and constantly rising up the chimney, it created a gentle, negative pressure. This pressure pulled fresh, cold air in through the pipe. As the cold air traveled the 50 feet underground, the surrounding earth warmed it, so that by the time it entered the shelter at the base of the hearth, it was no longer a frigid draft, but a supply of cool, fresh, breathable air. It was a self-regulating, passive system, a living, breathing house. She spent the last weeks of autumn stockpiling. An entire section of the shelter was a stable for Copper, complete with a deep bed of dry grass and a massive store of hay. Another section was for Firewood. She had cut and stacked cords of seasoned oak and pine, enough to last 2 winters. Shelves carved into the earthen walls and lined with stone held jars of preserved berries, dried meat, sacks of flour and beans, and roots she had harvested from the forest. The spring water was channeled through a smaller, stone-lined trough that ran through a corner of the dwelling, providing constant fresh water before exiting through a drainage pipe. It was a self-contained world, a fortress built not of stone walls and battlements, but of earth, timber, and foresight. As autumn deepened, the signs began to appear. They were subtle at first, whispers of a coming winter unlike any other. The geese flew south 3 weeks early, their formations tight and urgent. The squirrels were manic, stripping every pine cone from the trees, their chattering a constant, nervous hum in the woods. Ilara watched them, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Animals knew things that men in their sturdy wooden houses had forgotten how to read. One afternoon, a trapper named Silas passed by on his way to town. He saw the wisp of smoke from her chimney and reined in his horse. He stared at the grass-covered mound, his eyes narrowed in confusion.
"What is this thing?" he called out. "Some kind of burial mound?"
Ilara emerged from the low doorway, wiping her hands on her trousers.
"It's my home,"
Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. Heard about you. The crazy girl living in a dirt pile. You'll freeze to death in that thing. Or suffocate.
I'll be fine, Ilara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The sky has been too clear for too long. The sunsets are the wrong colour. Too pale, too yellow. There's ice in the high air.
The trapper scoffed. Just old mountain tales. It'll be a mild winter. The almanac says so. He kicked his horse into a trot, shaking his head and muttering about mad women. The day the storm came, the world went unnaturally still. The air was heavy, holding its breath. The sky was not blue or grey, but a strange, luminous white, as if the world were inside a pearl. Copper was restless in his stall, kicking at the packed earth and refusing to eat. Ilara knew. She made one last trip outside, securing the heavy wooden shutter over the single, small window cut into the front of the shelter. She checked the covering on her ventilation intake, clearing away the first few drifting snowflakes. The temperature was dropping so fast she could feel it, a physical plunge into a deeper, more profound cold. Then the first gust of wind hit the hill, a low moan that grew into a scream. It was time. Inside the shelter, the storm was a distant rumour. The thick layers of earth and sod muffled the screaming wind to a low, continuous hum, like a sleeping giant breathing. The air was cool, but not cold, holding steady at a comfortable temperature. The central hearth glowed, the fire burning with a clean, steady flame, its smoke drawn flawlessly up the chimney. Light from the flames danced on the stone walls and the great, curved timbers of the ceiling. Copper stood calmly in his stall, munching on hay, the terror of the storm already a memory. The storm blasted in, a physical assault of snow and cold. A woman fell forward into the shelter, pulling a small child with her. Behind them, a man, his face a mask of frozen agony, collapsed onto the earthen ramp. Ilara and the man fought together to force the door shut again, sealing out the maelstrom. They were the Millers. Their small farm was on the edge of town, the closest to Ilara's hill. "The roof!" the man, John Miller, gasped, his beard caked in ice. "The weight of the snow! It broke! The whole roof came down!" His wife, Mary, was trying to warm their son by the fire, her body racked with shivers. "We saw the smoke," she sobbed. "A thin trail from the top of the hill. We thought we were imagining it. It was the only thing to walk towards." Ilara said nothing. She gave them thick wool blankets. She ladled hot stew into bowls and pressed them into their trembling hands. She brought a bucket of warm water and a cloth to tend to John's frostbitten fingers. She did not ask questions. She did not say,
I told you so. She simply gave them refuge. For 3 more days, the blizzard raged. The Miller family slept, ate, and slowly thawed, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror at what they had lost and utter disbelief at the calm, warm sanctuary they had found. They looked at the arched roof, the stone walls, the ingenious chimney. They looked at this young woman they had once dismissed as an outcast, and they saw a prophet. When the wind finally died and a profound silence fell over the land, Ilara opened the door. The world was gone. It had been replaced by a landscape of pure, sculpted white. The snow was piled in drifts 15 feet high. The sky was a brilliant, painful blue. The air was so cold it felt sharp in the lungs. "The town," John Miller whispered, his voice full of dread. Ilara nodded. She saddled Copper, his powerful legs easily navigating the deep snow. She, John, and Mary, wrapped in every spare piece of clothing she owned, began the slow journey toward Silver Creek. The closer they got, the more the devastation revealed itself. Barns were flattened, their roofs caved in like broken eggshells. Houses stood buried to their eaves, dark smudges of smoke staining the snow where chimney fires had gotten out of control. There was no movement, no signs of life. The town bell, which should have been ringing in a crisis, was silent. They were met on the outskirts by a small group of survivors, their faces gaunt and hollowed by shock and grief. At the head of the group was Sheriff Thorne. His arm was in a sling, and a crude bandage was wrapped around his head. He stared at Ilara as if she were a ghost. Then his gaze fell on the Millers, alive and whole, and his expression crumbled. He walked forward, his steps unsteady in the deep snow. He stopped in front of her, ignoring the Millers completely. He looked from her to the almost invisible mound on the hill behind them, from which a steady plume of smoke now rose into the still air. "The town hall," he said, his voice hoarse, broken. "The roof collapsed. We lost 7 people. The Henderson house. A chimney fire. They never made it out. We've lost so many." He looked directly into Ilara's eyes, and for the first time, she saw no authority, no condescension. She saw only a man utterly defeated by a force he had refused to respect. "I was wrong," he said, the words catching in his throat. "We were all wrong. We called it Ilara's folly. We laughed at your mole hole." He gestured with his good arm toward the Millers. "That hole in the ground saved them. That foolishness of yours, it's the only thing that worked. The only thing that made sense." He finally looked away, ashamed. "How did you know?" "I listened," Ilara said quietly. "The land tells you everything you need to know. You just have to be willing to listen." In the years that followed, Silver Creek was rebuilt, but it was not the same town. The memory of the Great White Death, as it came to be known, was seared into the community's soul. They learned the lesson the storm had taught them. They learned humility. They learned from Ilara. They came to her, one by one at first, then in groups. Sheriff Thorne, his pride swallowed, was the first. He asked her to show him the principles of the arch, the logic of the thermal mass, the secret of the breathing chimney. She shared her knowledge freely, without bitterness or triumph. She taught them how to select a site, how to layer a roof with sod and clay, how to respect the immense power of the earth by working with it, not against it. Her shelter, once an object of ridicule, became a blueprint for survival. The townsfolk began to build their own winter homes, smaller versions of her design, dug into the hillsides surrounding the new town. They called them hearth homes, and Ilara's method became the standard. Her folly had become their wisdom. The original shelter was named simply the Hearth. It became a communal refuge, a place where travelers caught in a storm could find safety, a storehouse for emergency supplies. It was no longer the home of an outcast, it was the heart of the community. Ilara never sought a position of leadership. She had no desire for the validation of the people who had once cast her out. Her vindication was not in their apology, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of her work. It was in the steady warmth of her own fire, in the lives of the millers, in the new hearth homes that dotted the landscape, their grassy roofs blending seamlessly into the hills. Wisdom is often forged in the lonely fires of hardship, and its shape can seem strange and mad to those who have only known comfort. Nature does not bargain, and it does not forgive ignorance. It operates on a set of laws far older and more absolute than any drawn up by men in a town hall. Ilara had been cast out for breaking man's law, but she had survived by obeying nature's. Years later, a visitor to the valley might not have noticed anything unusual about the town of Silver Creek, save for the peculiar, gentle mounds on the hillsides, each with a stone-capped chimney breathing a thin wisp of smoke into the winter air.
And sometimes, they might see an older woman with quiet, knowing eyes standing beside an aging, loyal horse. She would be standing on the roof of her own home, a living part of the landscape, looking out over the valley she had, in her own quiet way, saved. The earth held, the arch held, and the wisdom of the outcast had become the salvation of the tribe.